And we took a trencher and we went in at least a foot deep, and we made trenches until we found a root. So we started on the outside and we did trenches coming in. And we made several trenches that way and got all the soil out of there and then refilled with a really nice compost. And then covered it with mulch. And then we added temporary irrigation so that in the summer months we had a way to irrigate and just give it that once a month irrigation. And that turned that tree around, boom, so fast. Okay, so yes, we could have gone and said, well, let's just try this first, and then we'll add that if it doesn't work. But by then we might have lost the tree. So because it was in such a visually important place, I mean, right on the entry that everybody had to drive by every day to come to the university, we pulled out the stops and got rid of the lawn underneath it. We did add a little bit of fertilizer, mulched, and then we did that vertical trenching, being very careful not to sever any or damage any big roots, and then filled in with a really nice compost. And we made our own compost on site because we had a couple of arbor companies, and then of course all of our clippings from the university went into a pile, and we would have this big grinder come every other year, and he'd go through our whole debris pile and just grind it all and just turn it into, and we'd mix some of the wood chips in with it and then make it into a great big pile. And I had a big old long thermometer I'd stick in there, and when it got to 160 for 3 days in a row, then we'd start turning it. Made really nice compost and spread that everywhere. So we had our own compost, and we'd put that mulch everywhere, super thick, and it really improved the soil. So even though you're putting the mulch on top, it improves the soil down underneath, because what are we bringing in? Microorganisms, okay? We're making a real nice situation for all the little critters that are live, that then they can, the worms can tunnel, and all the microorganisms are breaking things down, and it just makes it really nice situation, healthy, lots of nutrients for the trees and shrubs to live in. Okay, so let's keep going. Any other questions from being outside? Okay. I think seeing it really does help. Okay, so what branch should be removed on this, and where? It's so dead that all the bark is even gone. So the tree is trying to pinch it off, cut it off as close as you can without damaging that collar. Okay, so there's your dead, disease, damaged, crowded, crossing, competing. See, we did good. And then of course you can always, if you still remember 25%, if you've already gotten rid of those, you can get rid of a couple of those really tight V-shaped joints, or if they have too much included bark, some water sprouts, and then root suckers from the base of the tree. So I keep on top of these as much as possible so I don't have to count it in with my 25%. If you're always removing those, then that's okay. Okay, so look at this. The red is what they removed. So here's your suckers down here. They tipped some things back. They just cleaned up a little bit. That was kind of competing. Look at that one. Woo! That one was really going up there. So they removed it all the way down to where it came out. Okay, we got some that are crossing. These eventually can be removed altogether, and our main branches are going to start there. But we can leave them on for a little bit. But you can definitely shorten them up a bit. And then you just want to make sure that, you've got a dead one here. You got this one crossing. You got that one that's crossing several, getting everybody. So yeah, you can just remove a little bit here and there. And it's not that much, but it sure improves the whole shape of the tree, right? And that's what I try to do, is you get some of those dead, damaged, disease out of the way, some of the obvious things that are really bugging you, and then you can kind of say, what's going to improve the whole shape of the tree the most and go after those. Okay, so that's pretty good form. That looks really nice. So there are a whole bunch of different types of cuts, and these can be used for different things. So a crown cleaning, that's a lot like a thinning. You're going to get, mainly the cleaning is getting the dead, the damaged, and then any of your really crowded one, the rubbing ones, any of that out of the way. Now crown raising, what is that? That's making the naked trunk down below. So we can't go over the top with that because some people just really take that too much. Crown thinning is letting a little more light and air inside. So we'll just selectively prune out some branches to let it in. Now crown reduction, that really does need an arborist to do it because you're keeping the same basic shape that the tree naturally has and keeping that leader, and you're just selectively removing a little bit on the tips all the way down. It's not the easiest or the quickest, but it really does preserve the total shape of the tree that it naturally wants to have. Now crown restoration would be if some damage was done to it, and then we're going to try to restore the shape. So we might selectively prune to get branches growing back where one had to be removed or fell out during a storm, or maybe the top was broken out, so we're trying to get another one to grow up there and take its place. Now, structural pruning, that's usually what we do when they're really young, right? And if you do that well when they're young, you're not going to have to do as much pruning later. So that's our goal, is to do it when they're young and we first put them in. And then, of course, there's always going to be some pruning for clearance, keeping it off buildings, keeping it out of your face. We also have to keep it out of the traffic or else the trucks are going to prune them. Conifer pruning. How do we prune conifers? Hopefully we can let them do their shape that they want to be, right? Because you don't want to just prune back a conifer branch because oftentimes you won't get them to put on any new leaves. And you certainly don't lift them and make them lollipops. But conifer pruning, you really do have to, usually, you're going to remove most of that branch if you remove it. So it has to be smart. You just have to be really smart about what you're doing because conifers are not as easy to prune. And they're evergreen. So you can never see the branches until you climb inside, and I don't like doing it. And I don't like conifers poking me. Okay, so we don't get into many of these very often. Now your bonsai, of course, that's for your practitioners. They should know what they're doing if they're going to be doing that. You guys aren't going to have to help anybody doing that. Topiary, that's for people who really like to prune because you're going to be pruning a lot. Okay, I've done some espalier because I had a tight space. I trained fruit trees to grow along a wall, and that was cool. I happened to do it with citrus trees because I only had a little bit of space and I wanted to grow on the walls, so they're that thick. And they just, as the branches grow, they just go further on, and then as they develop fruit, it just hangs right there and I can pick them as soon as I see them. So that was kind of a fun thing. I just wanted to try it and it worked really well. But pollarding, I think I have pictures of that. So don't pollard. Now pollarding was done though back when they wanted the tree to make that response. So that same response we saw where they chopped off a branch and you got 10 to replace it, they were trying to do that because they were using that wood for fuel. And so they got what they wanted. That's why they were doing it. But there's no reason for any of us to pollard. That's just, and you'll still see it some places, and I always just go, oh, it's just really ugly. And they're not strong branch unions or anything. Now, shrub pruning, I try to stay away from hedges unless they're just natural hedges. But you need to prune narrower at the top and wider at the bottom so that everything gets sunlight if you're going to be pruning them at all. But I don't like doing hedges. You have to really commit to yourself. And once you've done them, even shaping them, Once they're committed to that, it's really hard to get them to come out of that and look decent. Okay, so that is a heading cut. Normally you wouldn't do that, but if you cut this off, this branch is going to grow like crazy, because remember, you just took away all the auxins that control that branch from growing too much. Where would it be better to prune? Down here somewhere, right? And then all of it would good. But that's cutting a 1-year-old shoot back to a bud, so there was a bud on here somewhere. Or cutting an older branch back to a point between them, leaving a little bit of a stub. And it's rarely appropriate on established trees. Okay, but that is a term that you'll see. They head it back. That's the response you get. Not beautiful, okay? So it'd be much better if here, instead of doing that heading cut, we come back here, we're not going to get that response. This one will grow, but you're not going to have that burst of dormant buds there like you have there. Really ugly, huh? And you've just created a bigger problem. Okay, and you get this column of decay there. Now look at that. First of all, what's wrong with this picture? They have this tiny little square for that poor tree to grow. It's getting reflective heat from everything around it, and then it wants to be this big, and they want it to be this big. So they just come and whack it back. So that tree had all that growth in 1 year, trying to survive and get back to its size. So somebody wasn't realistic in planting a tree there at all. Not only that volume of soil will not, long-term survival of this poor thing, not going to happen. So that tree is not going to have a very long life or give the benefits in that situation. Oh, see? I don't understand. I just don't. That is. No, it looks like the lines are on this side, but somebody got a little bit crazy. And look what they did. That's 2 years of growth. And it's on a silver maple. Why would you do that? Why? Yeah, that's horrible. And that is so messy and nasty. Do you know how much pruning that would take now? And I don't think you could ever restore the structure. Yeah. Look at that. What a mess that creates. So.
Power company goes for training.
Yeah. I don't know that they go for training. Okay, so a thinning cut. You're cutting it off at the right place. Remember, you're leaving that bark ridge and the branch collar intact. So that's a removal cut. That's more what you're supposed to do. You go back to its point of origin, to a larger stem, and you make it just outside. See, now here we can see where there's that swelling. This is no. Okay? That is trying to get it in line with the trunk. There is no benefit of doing that. So you cut it out here, and that's where the healing is going to happen. See this? They left that stub. The tree is trying to heal around it, but it can't because there's dead wood in the way. Okay, so that's much better. You can see the wrinkles. That will heal over really quickly. And look at the size of that cut, that little wound, in relationship to the bigger stem. That's good. It's going to heal from that. Ooh. Don't do that. This is why you use that 3-part cut, all right? So the first thing you're going to do is keep that from happening. See, now that will happen a lot more on thin-barked trees, but it can happen on any of them. So you do that first cut, just an undercut, and you want to make it wide enough that it's not going to peel. Okay? So it doesn't have to be very deep. You can do 1/3 of it. And then you do the cut that's the removal cut out there. That takes all the weight off. And then you come back and you can make your cut to be nice and perfect where you want it. You don't have all that weight, so you don't have to worry about anything peeling. It'll just come off. Understand that? Yeah.
A question on the rain. There's a white rain, and you were saying how you can, when you cut through it, you can see like what year or like how often one year might have had a lot of nutrients, a lot of water. Is that what that represents? Or?
Well, this is showing you more to the darkening in here. That wood is dead and dry. Okay, so this you'll get in more sapwood. Will be around this outside, but that has died off. Okay, so it'll be super dry, really hard. Okay, so here it is again. Do an undercut. You've identified your branch collar. Now, the arborist will oftentimes either do their uppercut, their second cut, just a little bit further up the branch so that it breaks off like that. They don't have to cut all the way through. Or they'll do it really close to being on top of it. But then you just have that little stub to cut off, and it's beautiful. And see how they left very little here to dry up, and then that branch collar is going to go right around it. Okay, so you're getting rid of the dead, dying, disease, crowded, weakly attached, low vigor, but you're 25%. You can't go crazy the first year, but you can clean a lot of that up. So an arborist company that, I've gone out before and checked with a resident, and they just say, well, I just had a tree company here, but they left all this stuff. And it's like, why would they leave those dead branches, especially hanging over the house? So they said, well, that wasn't what we quoted you for. We didn't quote you to remove all of it. So they do need to ask some questions and actually say, no, you need to remove the ones over the house much more than just over the grass, because those are more important if they fall than out over the grass. But yeah, get some specific language in those so that they know that they really are. You're going to remove all the dead out of the tree, that kind of stuff. Okay, can anybody tell me what this is? That shepherd's hook, black looking, what?
Blight.
Fire blight. Okay, what plants does that happen on? The rose family, yeah. Okay, so when you see this, what's important to remember about pruning that off? What's that?
Take it back to the green.
Yeah. I would even go into the healthy tissue, but you got to disinfect your cutting utensil in between every cut, because you can be spreading those spores. And you don't let them just lie in the ground. Again, that can be spreading the spores. So you definitely want to bag it, get rid of it, don't compost it, and clean your cutting tool in between each one. What is that one? Yeah, bagworm. What do we got going on there? What are those weird growths? They can be galls. That's a lot of them. I've never seen that many at one place. That's quite impressive. Anybody know what that is?
Cedar rust.
Yeah, and it is gooey. It's more shiny in person, but yeah, and it is the alternate host for that. So if you have apple trees around and you don't want them to have rust, you need to not have the alternate host. Okay, so crown thinning, we already talked about that. Selective removal of branches so that you're getting more light and air in there. You want to keep the tree's natural shape. Make sure you're maintaining the natural crown and the 2/3. You do not want to remove too much. So can you see how they did this? And then thinning, that was a pretty good job. Looks like they could have done a little bit more up here, but that's pretty nice. See, the same shape is there. They left selective branches to thin it out so that more light penetrates. And you can even kind of see this is solid shade right there, and then it's more dappled shade afterwards. Okay. That's nuts, okay? That is way too high a lifting. That's not our 2/3. That's more like 1/3 and 2/3. This isn't even a third. It's way up there. So that's going to make these branches more prone to breaking, and it's ugly. And you know, they should have left it down here somewhere. I don't even know why they would have pruned it up so high like that. That's crazy. Maybe, but it doesn't look like it's just scalped on this side. And I would agree with that. See, that's in the hell strip again. Why have those trees there if they're going to constantly be butchering them for that? Just plant a small tree that doesn't have to be butchered. We have a whole list of them. Okay, this just makes me sad. Yeah, so they just really over pruned that poor deodar cedar. That's crazy, poor thing. Okay, so yes, I know in cities, but again, they give it this tiny little area to live in, and then you have the big old trucks. They could just prune that branch off, but try to get some. This is wintertime, so you can't really see how much crown it has, but just get those branches up higher than the trucks are. Okay, so that one, they just raised the crown a little bit, but it looks like, they went a little bit much, but not too bad. They could have left it down. Who's seeing up above that? They could have left it down, but you put those pruners in somebody's hands and they just start going nuts. Now this one, it looks like it was low enough that it was probably poking people, so those had to be removed, but we have some good branches up here, so it still has a crown. Those should heal pretty quick. It's several, so they probably should have gotten some of those last year, but cities don't always go out every single year to do pruning. They might be on a 5-year schedule. That's not good. Yeah, see how we have all of those? Any guesses on what's going to happen with that? Yeah, you'll get a whole bunch of growth, or those are all going to dry up. They're not going to heal, and then you're going to get a column of decay, and that's going to split off. But it's also in one of those teeny tiny planters, too, that no tree should ever be planted in. Okay, so there you can see the man standing under that. And so he just took off some so that he can walk under it, but it doesn't look too bad. So crown reduction, this is a tricky one. You're just going to be making thinning cuts to reduce the size of the crown so that hopefully you're going to be smart about it so you don't get very many water sprouts or anything, but you're going to maintain the natural shape of the tree so you don't have to come back and do a lot. Now, don't look at that one for right now. So this is what, imagine if there's power lines here, okay? So to try to just get under the power lines, they could have flat topped it like they did, and then the tree reacted and it doesn't look good. But instead, if they take the time, so they did remove the leader, but they removed it to another one. Granted, this one will grow up and it'll eventually be up there again, but they also removed a little bit from all these to try to maintain that shape and size. Because you wouldn't just remove that and leave that there, because see, you had other branches that were higher, stronger, so you had to kind of subject all of those down a little bit. Yeah, that's the reaction you would expect. It's not pretty. Okay, so this one, they did the same thing, but they had dieback. Now that happens sometimes when there's not enough irrigation or it's too hot, too dry, and the tree has a really hard time getting the water up to those furthest leaves. So you might have some death up there, but you don't have to remove whole branches. You can bring them back down and still maintain the natural shape of the tree. but it does take more time and paying attention. Okay, so yes, you can prune them while they're young. I try to get them before I even have to get on a ladder to do them. Anytime you're up on a ladder with sharp utensils, you know, it can be a disaster, so be very careful about doing that. Okay, so training young trees. Remember, we want branches to be evenly spaced around as well as up the center of the tree. So we want to, you know, remove those competing leaders if there are any. We want to select our best scaffolding branches, so we're not only looking at where they're placed, but also that wide angle, not the tight, the V. We want the U-shaped angles. You know, get rid of any of those competing. You got twosies there. You know, you want to make sure that the top ones, you kind of have that shape, so these can be a little bit wider, longer, and then you can start removing some of those lower ones as it gets bigger. But, you know, that might look kind of Charlie Brownish, but it's going to react really well. And you want to get rid of these while they're young, because then the growth is going to go into the branches you actually want, and you're going to have a much better form.
Do you, how young a tree would you start pruning? Like if you just buy a tree that is fairly, I don't know, say 3, I don't know what it would be. But do you give it a year or 2 in the ground before you start pruning it?
That's a great question. I wouldn't buy a tree that had too many pruning issues from the nursery. I wouldn't, because that means they've been ignoring it. So I would imagine that the roots have been ignored too. So I would not get it if it has too many issues. I try to get them with pretty good structure if I'm buying a tree that's, most of them, even a 5-gallon can, they're going to be probably 5 years old, depending on the tree. I mean, I planted a moringa, and I was going to give my moringa away to one of you guys, and I totally forgot it. It's sitting on my kitchen table. But, yeah, you can have the moringa. I'll plant more even. But that one, I mean, it's this tall, and it's in a little 4-inch pot, and you would think, oh, that's way too tall. I pulled it out. The roots aren't circling or anything. It's just really fast grower. So you have to know your trees a little bit, but usually they're going to be several years old in a 5-gallon pot. So, you know, you want them to have been taken care of and pruned along the way. They should be doing that. So look for good branch structure even from the nursery. If you can fix it in 1 or 2 cuts, yeah, sure, bring it home. If it's a mess, you leave that hot mess at the nursery, let somebody else have it.
But after planting, how long would you, because
Oh, I would
you
do
got the stress of
I
it
wouldn't
being
necessarily,
planted.
yeah, I wouldn't do it right at planting necessarily.
what I was
Broken, for sure.
Yeah,
Water sprouts, for sure.
right.
Any of those. But I would leave it alone, let it grow for a year, let it get its roots. That next winter, definitely,
Okay,
I would
that's
cut
what
it then.
Okay, thanks.
And don't go to town, just a little bit here and there. Okay, so now look at this one. We want about 14 feet. That's for trees, or for trucks. We definitely want to keep that. You have to do at least 6.5 feet over a sidewalk, for sure. Because I know whenever they're getting too close to my head, I'm like, ugh, I don't like it. And then you want nice vertical spacing as well as going around, nice central leader. So yeah, you want, if they're going to be really, really large when they're a mature tree, you can leave greater spacing than if they're small trees. So 6 to 12 inches versus that 18 to 36. Okay, so this is another one that shows you, now they didn't remove everything, did they? Would we do some more pruning on that?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's next year, because you can see how much they had to remove already. So they removed quite a lot here, but they picked out their scaffolding branches, and they're going, okay, I'll come back next year and do a little bit more. Okay, so you have to know when to step away and kind of keep an eye on your pile. So if you've got too big a pile, you need to just put the pruners down.
So the second year, what would you
I would come back with the same stuff. I'd check for dead, damaged, disease first. It doesn't, but we're assuming it doesn't have that. I would go for the crossing. Okay, so I can see that this one's going up into that space. I would tip that there. I have this one coming up. I'd have to decide, do I want this one or do I want this one? Maybe remove that one. This one's growing into everybody's space. That would probably come out. Or I could prune to an outside bud so it goes out. See, it has this branch here, so I'd probably prune it off there. I'd probably head this one back a little bit, but I wouldn't prune it to a branch coming up like that. I'd probably prune it to a bud going down because I want something growing into this space.
What about the bottom two?
Those, depending on how big the tree was and if they were poking me when I tried to work on it, they'd probably go. Yeah. And you know, if this has enough canopy that the sun's not going to scald it, then I can probably remove those. Because
I've got a question back here.
Oh, yeah.
What would you say about a young tree, I think it's a red oak, that's just about 3 years old, and it's really, it's very tall and skinny, and it does have the brown branches at the top where maybe it's not getting enough water, but it's really not taken off. And it looks like it's 2/3 trunk and then 1/3 canopy, but they really haven't done anything else to it except watered twice a week, just like the lawn is watered and fertilized 3 times a year.
so it's not growing roots. If it's not growing, that means it's got root issues.
Okay.
So it's either not getting enough water or it doesn't have enough nutrition or the soil is so hard it's not able to grow roots.
Okay.
So they need to do something else, which might be loosening the soil or, you know, making a nice tree ring, getting it some nutrition, making sure it's watered deeply, that it'll start putting down those.
All the things that
Yeah,
you
because,
talked about today is really what.
yeah, so watering Bermuda grass is not enough water for any tree. We just don't have to put enough water on Bermuda to make that enough for trees. Unless, you know, if they're a native oak or something, then fine. But most of them are going to need more water than that, especially in the heat.
And fertilizing, but just doing the tree rings, tree circle and doing the mulch and watering more, not necessarily fertilizing right now.
Yeah, well, that compost is going to fertilize it. I mean, right now, I probably wouldn't fertilize it, but doing the compost or anything, that would help. But in the springtime, I would give it a little feed, and it'll probably just take off.
And it
But-
doesn't really show the root flare, but we're assuming that the root flare's not there because no developers and builders
Yeah.
is putting in trees right.
And no, they're putting them too deep all the time. So that was the first thing at my house is I found my root flare and exposed it. And it was down. And it covered with mulch. So yeah, I pulled it all, yep, I pulled it all back. Okay, so codominant stems. This is a great picture to show you what's going on. What is this line?
That's where they're growing together.
That's the bark ridge. So now on some really thin bark species, if they're next to each other, they might actually fuse together and grow. But most develop this kind of a ridge and they're not even attached. So what's going to happen when the wind comes along? They start wobbling and then one of them's going to rip off and it's going to be a huge wound. Okay, so these are already pretty big. It should have been fixed a long time ago. And you just choose whichever one you like better and you're going to remove the other. But at this point, you're going to have a big, big wound. That's up high. But that will never be a strong union. All right, so this one you can see it's really hard to see where the collar is. But it has a little bit of included bark. Not too bad. At least this one is smaller than that one. So that's good. There's a ratio too. So as long as these guys are smaller than the main trunk and they don't have too much included bark, they're going to be strong. But if you have, see how these are almost the same size? that's not going to be as strong of a union. And it has a little bit of included bark too, but it's just, that's going to get more and more. Because remember, these grow out. Eventually, those are going to be hitting each other quite a ways up. And you're just going to have that big gap, because then as rain hits, it's falling down in there. You're going to get rot down in there. And at some point, you're going to have one of them fail, and it'll be bad. Okay, see that? You got all of that in there that, well, and look at these. One of those should have been removed too. So you're getting that little bit of bark included there, but at least you've got, you got a little bit of a stronger union there. But again, we don't like to have, see how that makes a real sharp V versus more of a U, so that's a little bit stronger. Not the greatest, especially when they're about the same size. Our favorite. Yeah. Bradford pears were all the rage. They were really great, but then 20 years down the road, they were all failing because they do that.
Do they ever water those city trees below? Is it engineered that the root systems do get more water than just the surface water?
No. Yeah. Really sad. But see, this one, I mean, you could clean out some of that, but that is its natural state that it wants to do, and it's just not very strong to have that many branches coming out of one spot. Yeah, because that happens. Yeah. Yeah, that is really, really sad. But you can see, look at how big of cuts they have off that. Really bad. It's not doing so great. And at that point, there should be one more cut. Right down there. Yep, plant something else. Okay, so this is another one that's really late, but you can see you've got that included bark. They should have done something about this a long time ago, but they went ahead and removed one. And see, that looks, I bet you they were just like, oh no, that's so much, right? So that probably hurt a little bit to remove it, but they were able to do it. And then years later, see, it came out of it.
Would you have cut that more at an angle, a little bit more? Or
no.
is that angle the right?
That's okay angle.
Okay.
I mean, I like them a little bit angled so that water's going to run off of them. But remember, you also want to have the smallest wound as possible so that the tree can hopefully heal it. Okay. So yeah, hopefully you can see some wrinkles or something there to make sure you're outside, but you just got to heal it, let it grow fast, and it took over. But see, look at that, what happened. So even though this grew and it tried to close over and everything, that, because of exactly what you said, it dried out. You had that column of rot there, and it never was able to totally get past that. I mean, it grew for a while. So that should have been, oh, here we go, here we go. Don't use garden hose for, that was a big deal years ago. Everybody put wire through garden hose and use that. They have perfectly wonderful strapping now. Let's use the strapping. It kind of looks like chain, and you can cut it at any length, and it locks through itself, so you can wrap it around. It's just rubber, so you can nail it right to a wooden post. So it's really easy to use, and it's way better than that. And then you can just take it off when you're done, and it stretches and stuff rather than strangling the tree. Now this, they put in a threaded rod because apparently this was coming out, look at that, all the way down. I would have probably just taken it off, but they wanted to save that. But now you have committed that you are going to be checking that all the time. From then on, you're going to have to loosen it up. Remember, the tree is growing out, so you've got to loosen all these and check on them once in a while so the tree doesn't just try to swallow them in. And then, you know, some poor arborist that someday is going to hit his chainsaw on that. But yeah, that's not a good situation. And I don't know how long ago that happened, but the tree was much smaller, so may have been the time to just replace it. Okay, subordinating a branch. This is what we want to do so to make sure our leader is the leader. We have to make sure any others that are growing too much, where they're the same size as or they're larger than, we just remove those out. Now, see, most of these, though, they're coming down to the branch that they came out of. So this one, of course, they took out. It's crossing with all sorts of stuff and just growing too wild and free. So we had to take that one out. And then, you know, here, that's really thick. So that was a good removal. It's in the way of other things. And same with that one. It's growing way too heavy. You know, there might be some other things that you could take out of there, but, you know, it looks a whole lot better than this. So light pruning, you would only take out these things, and then a more moderate pruning, you would take out that, but then you got to stop, because comparing this with that, we've done our 25% at least. But we've really improved the shape and the structure of this tree. Because this right here has the potential to become really bad pretty quick. So we need to subordinate that to make sure that it keeps its form. Okay, so that's exactly what they did here. You had strong branches coming out and shooting straight up. So they cut it off there, subordinated those so that they'll be, you know, you'll still have a leader. They're not going to try to take it over. And remember, calorie pears are very upright anyway, very V-shaped. So that's kind of the normal shape for them. You won't get it to do anything other than that, but that at least subordinated those branches so it'll spread out a little more. Okay, so you can't even tell after it's got the leaves on, but that's a subordinated branch there. See, so they took this one out. It was just growing up too strong. Taken over from that leader. Okay, we don't want to do that. Remember, we want to cut outside. That's a good. That's good wound closure. We saw a number of those out there. So when your branch bark ridge is intact, you get that circular shaped wound wood. We'll close over the cut. If you remove the branch bark ridge, it's going to be more oval. And then, of course, if you remove part of it, you're going to get more of that U-shaped wound wood closing over the cut. But we really want to leave that the bark ridge and the branch collar intact as much as possible. Okay, so there's a little bit of bad pruning there where they hit things, and so you didn't get complete closure. That donut will eventually fill in and close that hole if you stay outside far enough. Ugh. Okay, so we saw that examples of that out there where they cut it and then all those buds go nuts and you have worse problem than you did before. Don't ever do this. And I know arborists will do it if the homeowner insists upon it, because rather than, they need to educate and just say that's not a good idea and why. But if a homeowner insists on it and just say, no, I just want it topped up, they'll do it. But we need to do more education, and then, of course, an ISA certified arborist would walk away rather than do that. They would say, I'm not having my name on this.
I have a question.
Yes.
Back on that other picture where we just did. So on the previous picture, you showed an undercut and an inch out uppercut.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I was trying to understand why, and is that to keep it from like ripping? Because
Yes.
it looks like that's ripping on the
right
is that, yeah.
Well,
So,
at the top.
at the
yeah,
top,
and
it
oh,
looks
that
like
one for sure.
So that wasn't a cut, they cut it some kind of way to rip the bark, and then.
This tree probably looked like this one, and they just were doing a flat top.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
They just brought it way, way down. Now, insurance doesn't care about having trees. They're really horrible with trees. They're afraid of them. And they really only care about not paying out money. So they really want the trees to be far away. They don't want them to be able to fall on roofs or anything. So oftentimes they will tell them, you've got to prune those trees away from your house. And you know, my husband sells insurance, and he actually, when they call in, they give him an address, and he looks on a Google map, and he will be looking for things like that, the trees and all that. They also don't want a way for squirrels and stuff, roof rats, whatever, to be able to get up onto your roof and make a home. So insurance companies don't like trees, but we just need to be really smart about keeping them away from the house and looking for the risks, because there's always risk with the tree. Yes, it could fall over tomorrow, but is that a real risk, or is that very, very unlikely that that's going to happen? So if the tree is healthy and growing, probably not going to happen. And so there's really very little risk in a healthy, happy tree. But if there's a bunch of dead wood in it, the branches are pretty big, yeah, those need to be removed. And if you knew that they were dead and you didn't, and then it falls on your house, they have a good chance of not covering that damage. Okay, no topping. This kind of looks like that oak we looked at out there. Yeah, so too much lifting. They took too much off of that. I hate it when they do that. The trees do that. They just sprout anywhere they can get a bud to grow. It's really bad for the tree. Yeah, look at that. Isn't that sad?
Yeah. I bet they were so proud of that.
They took every leaf off.
It was terrible.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they did. Look at the poor trees trying to survive. Okay, so there when you have your nice little lollipop, but you can see there's lots of lines. So I can share these. Okay, here's your painting. All right, there is no need to do the wound dressings because they don't really help at all. Why is that over there? So here we go. You want to prune to train your young plants, maintain your plant health, have a reduced risk of failure, provide clearance, control the plant size. Although if you selected them well, you don't have to control the plant size. Now, you can influence the flowering, fruiting, and the vigor by how you prune too. Remember that. You definitely don't want to be cutting off all your flowering if you're hoping for fruit. You can improve the view or keep a view. That's why people put in evergreen trees sometimes. Also, you know, provide some wind block. You can reduce the shade or improve shade, give you some wind or improve. Did you know that trees can add 15% value to your home? That's crazy. Okay, so select. I do not know why that won't go away. Why will it not go away? Oh, it's not going away. There it goes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about planting. We already talked about planting, that we want to dig it wider, at least loosen the soil. If you want to give it a little boost, you can add some good soil, some compost in there, mulch ring around it. I never plant if I can't water. They always need to be watered in when you plant them. Even if it's just to settle the soil that you've loosened up, it gets it in there, gets rid of the big air pockets. I don't necessarily go back and stomp the soil back down because that kind of ruins the idea of me loosening it up. But we also want to make sure that we've exposed that root flare and that that is going to be level or just slightly above level of the ground. Okay, why I say slightly above, it's not bad to put them about an inch high, because then if we get a whole bunch of rain and that hole fills with water. Who was telling me that they removed some trees? Yeah, she said that she's got such a water table that they removed a tree that it was not doing well and the hole totally filled with water. That's too much water. Trees can't survive in that. There's no trees that like water all the time. So having a little bit of root above where they can still get oxygen will help that tree survive. And especially if you mulch over that, then they have some area where the roots can be in oxygen. If you don't have some in oxygen, it's just going to die. And you'll get that really nasty smell, that kind of sewer smell, because it's just rotting. Yeah, that's a for sure sign that you have too much water. But our clay soils are heavy clay. And we can't control the rain, but we can control our drainage. That's another good reason for digging a very large hole, is because that will give all that air space that is left in there that you've loosened up, more space for that water to drain and get away. Okay, soil type, the water availability. If people are not willing to irrigate their trees that first year, they're not going to survive. They're just not. We have to baby them at least that first year. If they have sandy soils, what's the difference between our sandy soils and clay soils? What do we have to think about? Way better drainage, so the water just runs right through. So we really need to add compost then, because you got to have something to hold some nutrients. Sand to have that's why I'd always take clay over sand anytime. Sand doesn't hold on to nutrients, and it doesn't hold on to water. So you are watering all the time. And then too, even if they set out roots everywhere, you get a big wind, the sand won't even hold together. So yeah, sand you have to know if you have sandy soils, because it will not hold water or nutrient. Light exposure, what is important about light exposure with trees? Aren't they all made to be in full sun?
No.
Not all of them. Some of them like a little shade. Okay, so having them so they can get some shade in the afternoon is usually what they need. Most of them, everything loves the morning sun, okay, until about 1 o'clock. And then some things are going, I'd really appreciate some shade about now, and they'll do a lot better. Maintenance needs. Some trees have higher maintenance needs. You're going to have to prune them more often. You're going to have to, they're going to be more care. Like your fruit trees, high care, right? You got to spray them, you got to prune them every year, all this care. So they're needy. You got to know the mature height and spread. Now that's usually a range. So you've got to kind of know, is that normal for here? Because if you see, now crepe myrtles here, they can get pretty good size. But if you go to North Carolina, they're 30 feet tall. They have some big crepe myrtles. I couldn't even believe it. I went to an arboretum when I was there, and it was middle of winter, so I'm just judging that it was a crepe myrtle by its bark. But I was going, oh my gosh, this looks like a crepe myrtle, and I've never seen a crepe myrtle that big before. But sure enough, it's a crepe myrtle, and it was so huge. So we have to know, because that literature is going to include that height, as well as the height they grow in the desert of Arizona. So we have to know how big they usually get here and how wide, so that you can give them enough space. You need to know, of course, urban versus residential. Residential, they can get away with more, hopefully, unless they have HOA controlling things. Urban settings are really tough on trees. They don't give them enough soil, they don't give them enough water, they're abused. They're not pruned properly. They have a really rough situation, so urban trees have a harder time. And then, of course, they got all the, the pollution and things like that. So it's really hard for trees to survive. And then, of course, our hardiness zones. What is the USDA based on? The hardiness zone. How cold it gets and how long it's cold. How about the AHS, American Horticulture Society? That's heat. How hot it is. That's the one I'm interested to see with this warming trend that's happening. If they change those, the USDA zones didn't change very much. But that AHS, I'm wondering if they're going to change those zones according to the exceptional heat that they've been getting in some places. And then, of course, if you do Sunset, you won't ever find those on a plant tag, but Sunset has, like 24 zones or something. They take into consideration all sorts of little microclimates and everything. But at least the ones you're going to see on tags are the USDA zones. So that's only considering cold, not heat. So you have to know too on some of those, will they tolerate the heat and extensive heat? In Arizona, even the saguaro cacti, which are considered tree there, were failing because of the extreme heat that they've had the last couple summers. And it was not only so hot, but it was hot for days and nights on end. It never cooled off at nighttime. It wouldn't get below 90 at night. Okay, so what do trees do when, that's a great thing to know too. Trees have to exchange gases to be able to photosynthesize, create their energy, right? And if it's too hot, when it gets above a certain temperature, they close their stomata. They're not going to exchange gases anymore because they're losing moisture the whole time those stomata are open. And if there's no moisture coming in, they're saying, am I going to die quickly because I'm losing so much moisture, but I can continue to photosynthesize, or am I going to just hunker down, shut off photosynthesis, and survive on my stored energy until this heat wave is over? So they hunkered down, but then when it lasted day after day after day after week, then the trees had used up all of their energy and they started to die. And it was because there, like here, they had a bunch of mature trees that had one little dripper, and they had never added any irrigation to them. They weren't irrigating the trees deep enough or enough, period. And then, they had to go through all that heat. They just weren't able to survive. So it was a long-term stress. And yeah, when saguaro cactuses are dropping arms, and then the fluids inside them were like bubbling, almost boiling, it looking like. So it was really, it's hard. Okay, let's see if we're, okay, so you can plant for any of these reasons. So where do we plant for shade? South and southwest. Okay, that is where you're going to get the most bang for the buck that cools your house. South, southwest. You got to plant them far enough away that the tree's not going to hit your house, but it has to be a tall enough tree that it's actually going to cast some shade on you in the summertime. Deciduous trees are best for that because then you're going to get the sun in the winter but shade in the summer. Okay, beauty, that's all subjective. We can decide what we think is beautiful. Property value. Are trees adding to our property value? They really can. If you have a street that is lined with mature trees, the whole neighborhood's value goes up. It's safer. People want to live there. Their health is better. They've done the research that all of those things, you have all of these wellness benefits, not to mention it's intercepting the rain, it's sequestering carbon, it's taking pollutants out of the air. So trees really do add to the value. They can bring wildlife if they're mature trees. We certainly want the birds and the butterflies and all of those things, so that's kind of nice. It decreases the temperature. Full mature trees are like having an air conditioner running. So if they really want to turn around climate change, where it's hot and dry, if they planted enough trees, they could do that because they would change the weather. The trees can actually change the weather. But it's not just planting the trees, it's getting them to mature size. So that's the tricky part. They decrease because they clean our air. And then, of course, they soften everything. They absorb sound. They can block views. There's so many benefits to trees. But it's usually the mature trees that we're thinking of when we're talking about the benefits. So definitely don't plant under utilities unless they're going to be really low, so 20 feet or less. Usually they say 15. You can do some medium ones, of course, tall zones back away from the house. They usually say do evergreens on the north side of the house so they'll block those winter winds. Okay, so this is your tree. with the roots going way, way out. Not very deep. Now it might have some sinker roots in there, anchorage roots that go down deep, but its feeder roots are out like that. So think of that when people are saying, oh no, I haven't done anything to my tree. Nothing should have been, you know, they don't understand. Okay, so here's another case. I had a bunch of people that because they were trying to conserve water, they were taking out their the lawns, the turf, and replacing with artificial turf. Great idea, right? Okay, what they didn't think, and even the turf installers didn't think about was that tree, even though it might not have been in the turf, it was next to it. Guess where it was getting all of its water? Its roots were under that turf. Especially if it only has one little dripper on it. So when they cut out the turf to remove it, they don't just take off the top. They don't just scrape it. They remove it. They don't want Bermuda grass coming back, so they take out several inches. Where are feeder roots on trees? Top 6 inches. And then what they do? We'll take out that 6 inches. We're going to put gravel in there, compact the living daylight out of it. We want nice, smooth, artificial turf. And then they roll out the turf, they staple it in. Of course, there's no water there. What happened to the trees? Dead. Mature, beautiful trees were dead. No coming back. And they're just like, what did they do? Now, the other thing they might have done, I did see some that didn't outright die at first. They just had that really curly. They had put some sort of herbicide down to make sure that the Bermuda grass didn't come back. So the 1-2 punch. So you had this funny growth when they first tried to survive in the springtime, and then they couldn't make it. There was no water for them. A bunch of their roots had been. And imagine this, if there's no water being applied over here, and there was only water here for the lawn, where are the roots going to be? Where the water was, exactly. The trees are not going to grow. They're not going to spend any energy growing out into places that are rock hard and hot. So I had a laser thermometer, and on a 104-degree day, I shot it onto the concrete. Any guesses?
130.
132. Okay? Concrete. It was only 104 out. So then I had some gravel, because everybody loves to use gravel as mulch, right? Kicked the gravel aside. The gravel was the same temperature as the concrete. Kicked the gravel aside, so I was just down to bare dirt. Guess what? The bare dirt was just as hot. That gravel does nothing it doesn't make the soil better, doesn't cool it, nothing. Doesn't help retain moisture. And so then I went over to where I had mulch in the beds and cleared away that mulch, and it was like 110. So it was cooler, it was moister, I could see some moisture. So even though the sun is hitting it and it's pretty intense, it was way cooler. But imagine what the roots are doing if it's 136. They're frying. They can't survive in that. So mulch is really good for our roots to protect them. Much better than gravel, paving, anything like that. But we got to think about the roots because they're there. And so we can really help our trees grow better. Okay, I think this should be. Okay, so make sure you don't plant them too close because you certainly don't want to damage the structure. And those roots will go slowly, but if there is water, they will find water. They're going to grow for water and take advantage of it. Make sure before you dig for any planting you call and make sure that there's no utilities in the area. I have some really great videos of people that dug and then blew up. They're on the internet, you can find them. Yeah, visibility. That's an important reason to prune too, but think about it before you plant. Are people going to pull up to a stop sign and not see around the corner, or they can't see anything because you planted a shrub or a multi-stem tree in the way, something like that? And then if you want shade, you got to make sure you plant one that's actually going to give you shade, you know, for the space, whatever it is. You can do a lot. So when to plant, of course, here we go. This is a great picture. This is on the Texas A&M site. There's my berm. Okay, so I would actually dig a little bit wider than this because I take the width of the container and I go out that much on both sides and I really loosen up that soil. And then I've mixed in my goodies with all of that soil that I backfill, put that soil ring, my berm outside of that, fill it after I've backfilled it, make sure it's settled in there, and then I'm going to make sure, see, I didn't dig it any deeper than the root ball so that the root flare is even with the ground. And then I'm going to fill that up with some mulch, give it a good watering, protect the trunk for a little bit. Not that I'm going to go out there and weed eat in there. I just make sure we mow around. But that's a really good, you can use that one when you're trying to help people on planting properly. And I know that they have asked master gardeners to be involved with when they're doing tree giveaways. So you might be asked to do that and just handing out this and give them a little talk on how to plant them right. And then of course, watering them for that first year. So yeah, at least twice as wide. That's not soil from around here. And then, you know, removing it from container. How do we remove it from a container? Do we grab the trunk and pull up? No. Now some of them, you can roll them on their side a little bit, pound on the container, but you're going to hang onto that trunk and slide that container off. Sometimes if it's heavy enough, you can just have that in there and you slide it this way and it'll come out. And then you can just roll it into the hole if they're too heavy. And then you just fill in. If you do have to, you know, they do, so if the root ball is too tight, I told you I already checked the root ball before I even leave the nursery, so it's not going to be too tight. And then, yeah, it shouldn't look like a pencil coming out of the ground. It should have a root flare to it. And I find those all over the place. You will find them everywhere. Now, what's the difference between a container versus ball and burlap? Anybody know? Or this is the big old tree spade. Have you ever gotten to see one of those? Yeah, they're awesome. And I have had really good success moving trees with a tree spade, if they're a big enough spade. Even in the dead of summer, you can do that because it takes all those roots and puts it in exactly the same size hole. In containers, you're getting all of the roots, but they may be already circling, girdling, you know. In ball and burlap, they cut off a lot of the roots. So, oh wait, I thought I had another picture in here, different one. So ball and burlap, when they come in, they dig in January after they get enough rain. These trees have been growing in the field, but they dig them in January. And then they seriously put burlap around them and tie them up, and then you're on your way. Are we out of time? I talk too much, I'm sorry. Okay, we already did all this. There's your mulching. How much mulch you need. What kind of mulch do you use? Arbor chips, get them for free. Okay. Oh, the no volcano. No volcano. Okay, that's enough. We're going to be done. Sorry. I do. I sent it to you. Do you have it? I emailed it to you. Okay, please hang on for 1 minute. Do you have your email?
I don't have to work from here.
Oh, she's going to see. I did a survey. I really wanted you guys